Most stories have a beginning and an end. You start a story, you experience the entire thing, and it ends. Story over. This can be the case with a single game or with a franchise of games. You start with one game and you finish with, say, the third or fourth, and together they tell one story that carries you from game to game. Some franchises, however, take a different approach by telling two different stories at once, which both interlink. This is where writers of a franchise tell one individual story in each game, however, there is a narrative thread which continues from game to game. This is called an overarching narrative. In this video, I want to break down and analyze and look at exactly why Assassin's Creed Brotherhood handles this the best of the Assassin's Creed franchise, and perhaps some of the best in any game I have ever played. To look at this properly, we need to first establish what is an overarching story. Well, let's use the first two games in the Assassin's Creed franchise as a prime example. In Assassin's Creed 1, the narrative which forces the game forward is that of Desmond Miles. He's kidnapped by Abstergo and used for their gain. They need to find an Apple of Eden by using Desmond's DNA in the Animus. I'm just going to assume for the purposes of this video that you understand Assassin's Creed, because I'm going to talk about things as a matter of fact without having to explain everything in detail. By Desmond being forced into this Animus, it initiates the subplot of the game. Now, most people would hear subplot and assume a side narrative, however that's not really the case. The story of Altair in Assassin's Creed 1 is at the forefront of the game. It's the main part. It's even on the box art, but it's the story of Desmond that gives the story of Altair a reason to exist and a reason to be told. We aren't just being told Altair's story, we're being told it for a reason, and this reason allows for Altair's story to have consequence to future games which don't include anything even related to him. Within Assassin's Creed 2, Desmond's story continues exactly where it left off, however Altair isn't seen in this game, other than that weird little dream sequence. But this game is not a sequel to Altair's story, however it does continue and feel like a direct sequel to Assassin's Creed. This is because the overarching story is what carries each individual subplot and strings them together. In Assassin's Creed 2, the main story is that of Ezio hunting down and assassinating Templars in revenge of his father and brothers. It's a coming-of-age story, and Ezio grows a lot as a person over the 30 years we play him in Assassin's Creed 2. That's the story that's marketed, and that's the main story of the game, which can easily be enjoyed on its own. However, there is an overarching story of Desmond, of the modern day, of the Isu and Pieces of Eden, which connect all of these otherwise separate, disconnected stories and connects them to make them all mean something to the overarching plot. Ezio is not of any consequence to Connor Kenway, and without the overarching story, these would just be separate stories of separate characters which are unrelated to each other, however exist within the same universe. By adding the overarching plot layer, you get a reason for both of these totally unrelated stories of Ezio and Connor to both feel important to each other, since they both affect Desmond and his overarching narrative, and again string these two otherwise unrelated stories together in a meaningful way. In Assassin's Creed 2, the game is around 25 to 30 hours of content, depending on how you play it, but the mandatory overarching narrative takes up about 25 to 30 minutes, and that's all. It's a minute amount of time considering the size of the game and story, however, the reason it works so well is how it's integrated into the game. There is a reason we are visiting Ezio. It's established early on that Desmond needs to learn abilities. He needs to be as able as his ancestors are so that he can combat the Templars in the modern day. They also need to acquire the Apple of Eden and find out about the Vault, which is introduced at around the halfway point. Ezio's story alone is compelling, but by the overarching story slowly dripping you more information, the bleeding effect, Apple of Eden, the Vault, Subject 16, it just gives you more and more reason to be experiencing this already compelling tale of Ezio Auditore. This is how you write a good overarching narrative. You marry its storytelling with that of the subplot, and Assassin's Creed had this down for the first 4 years that it was in the market. The fact they wrote just as well for Ezio as they did for Desmond is what gives these games life, is what makes it compelling. You aren't playing for one sole reason, you're playing for many, to see Ezio find these Templars, to experience Italy during the Italian Renaissance, to see Ezio grow and what he can do, but also you want Desmond to learn these abilities, you want to see what's inside of the vault, you want Ezio to find the Piece of Eden so that Desmond can find it too, and most of all, you want to see these two stories help each other out narrative-wise. The story of Ezio is great, and the story of Desmond is great, but neither would be as good as they are without the other being present. A lot of what Desmond is doing would feel mundane, and a lot of what Ezio is doing would feel like baggage to the story. But together, they complement each other incredibly well and breathe life into each other. For me, this narrative hit its peak in 2010 with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Patrice knew where he was taking this story, he knew what it wanted to do, and he knew where he wanted it to go. And it was like a well-oiled machine at this point. Unfortunately, he left Ubisoft during the production of Brotherhood. This didn't affect the game due to it being nearly done, and by then the narrative was fully formed. However, this did see the decline in the modern-day quality in future games, and that the overarching narrative clearly became muddled and confused as people didn't understand the direction and the care that went into producing it. It wasn't just a storyline that was separate or the background, it had to be married to the narrative which was being told in the subplot, the ancestor story, but they clearly lost that after Brotherhood. But back to the topic at hand. Brotherhood had found the exact right style for how this overarching narrative needed to be written, and the symmetrical story beats it needed to hit with the subplot of Ezio. The premise of the overarching plot in Brotherhood was that Desmond and the gang needed to find the Piece of Eden, Ezio's apple, which we see in Assassin's Creed 2. How does Desmond get that? You find the correct memory in which Ezio last had the apple. Desmond, however, is so synchronized with Ezio at this stage that Ezio's mental state is being transposed onto Desmond, forcing him to retreat into an earlier memory, which means Desmond now has to relive Ezio's memories from the point the previous game ended to the point where they find their Apple of Eden. So now we have our reason and purpose, why we are experiencing Ezio's story this time around. It makes sense not just from a continuation of the modern day, but also a continuation of Ezio. Why are we visiting Ezio again? Because they saw he found the apple whilst they were searching for the vault and training Desmond, so it makes logical sense that if they needed an apple, they'd go after Ezio's apple. Next up, we see that Desmond and the gang have taken refuge in the Monteriggioni villa from Assassin's Creed 2. They do this because it was already set up in Assassin's Creed 2 that the villa has a sanctuary. The villa is a base of operations for the assassins. It makes sense that the modern day gang would set up there, again, making Ezio's story feel as though it has consequence to the overarching narrative rather than being separate. The overarching narrative this time has the best structure in any Assassin's Creed game. It's not intrusive, it's not drawn out, it tells you exactly what you need to know. It's intriguing, mysterious, satisfying, and incredibly unpredictable. You only play a mandatory of about 25 minutes in the whole game, but there is so much that links to future games and the overall story, not to mention plenty of lore. The reason this is so good is because it makes you play this 25-minute part, which is necessary for the story of that single game to make sense, sense, while roughly linking it to other games so that returning fans feel they're returning. However, new fans can easily pick up Brotherhood and understand what's happening and have a good time as well. It gives you enough information to enjoy just Ezio's story to the fullest. What it does incredibly well is it takes all of the extra story, lore, backstory, character progression, cryptic messages, which are all exclusive to the overarching story, and makes them optional. Any dialogue with the main characters, any emails, collectibles, exploration, Subject 16 puzzles, messages, all of it is optional. Anyone who is interested in these things and is following the story will seek these out, as it's part of the fun to try and find all of the hidden secrets which add to the story. Anyone who just wants to play for Ezio's story doesn't even need to bother. For example, these Subject 16 puzzles and messages add plenty of lore on their own, with each one teasing you with cryptic messages until you finally unlock the truth, the message from 16 himself, in which he spouts a lot of cryptic information, which when deciphered is even still yet to be fully explained and fully discovered. It's these kinds of things that help the overarching narrative grow, because even though these things are background and optional content, there are still the exact same love and care as if it was something that was part of the main game. The structure of this is by far the best in any Assassin's Creed game, simply due to how this game can be played by a returning fan or a new player, and both can enjoy the game to the max, but for entirely different reasons. Assassin's Creed Origins tried to go down this route, whether on purpose or by accident, by having very minimal playable modern day sections, which set up the reasons for why you're visiting Bayek, and don't feel too intrusive, with any things relating to the proper storyline and lore hidden in the Isu temples or in the emails or optional dialogues. However, it just didn't at all achieve the marriage between Bayek and Layla. Their stories felt separate and neither compelled me to play the other. Bayek's was compelling alone, but nothing he did had consequence to Layla or made me feel Layla's story was being affected. Layla's story was lackluster on the surface. When diving into emails and the Isu temples, it was very intriguing. However, nothing in her story had any consequence or need of Bayek directly, which made them both feel entirely disconnected and not in any way joint or needing of each other to exist, unlike the way you feel with Desmond and Ezio's stories being reflective of each other. I used to say Assassin's Creed as a franchise had the greatest story I'd ever played. Something I loved and was deeply invested in just due to the sheer richness and care that went into making not just the ancestor story compelling, but that of the overarching story too. With every little detail being meaningful, with every little code to decipher, something which added to and deepened the story, making it feel that everything you were doing had an overall purpose and there was weight to every single story beat, whether it be in the past or in the present. Ezio didn't just have to find the apple to stop the Templars from having it, he had to find it so that he could pass it on to Desmond. Their stories were so interwoven yet so non-intrusive to newcomers, the writing was honestly a beauty to experience and something that I greatly miss in the franchise. Patrice Désilets poured his creativity and passion into Assassin's Creed, and I want to thank him for giving me the opportunity to experience the games that he produced and experience his vision, and I'll always hold Assassin's Creed 1 to Brotherhood as a marvel of writing in the industry. Thank you all for watching. Been waiting to put this together for a while. Don't forget to subscribe and support me, as well as hitting that like button. You can also support me over on Patreon if you want to help me out that bit more. Tons of extra content over there, so I'd really appreciate it. Check out my other videos from this week and the others to come this week. Comment down any future topics for video essays you'd like to see, and I'll catch you all later on.